Human history has been shaped not only by what was done, but also by things whose reasons could not be understood. There were traces that, even when left behind, could not be explained. The Nazca Lines were born right in the heart of such an enigma. They were not a structure, not a monument, not a city. Yet, they were regarded as one of the greatest and most mysterious works ever made by human hands. The Nazca Lines are located in southern Peru, in an extremely arid area known as the Nazca Desert. This desert is a place with almost no vegetation on its surface, where strong winds rarely blow, and where rain is almost non-existent. Precisely for this reason, any mark made here became permanent. And the Nazca Society realized this permanence. At first glance, these lines appeared only as long paths and vague marks. But when viewed from above, the surface of the desert turned into a gigantic narrative. Straight lines stretched for kilometers. Geometric shapes exhibited perfect proportions, and animal figures emerged with striking clarity. This led to an inevitable question: why would a society create a work that could only be seen from above? When were the Nazca Lines drawn? This question was the foundation of the whole narrative. Archaeological findings showed that the lines were created between 500 BCE and 500 CC. This period coincided with the time when the Nazca civilization was at its strongest. The Nazca people had a culture based on agriculture, built irrigation systems, and lived in direct contact with nature. For the Nazca people, nature was not just a living space, but also a sacred power. Rain, sun, wind, and earth were all regarded as parts of a divine order. Therefore, every great work was not only for practical purposes, but also carried symbolic meaning. When were the Nazca Lines first noticed? Of course, during the time they were created, these lines were known by the Nazca people. But when viewed from the ground, the whole forms could not be perceived. The lines only made sense when seen from certain vantage points and heights. For this reason, the lines remained unnoticed by the modern world for centuries. At the beginning of the 20th century, everything changed with the development of aviation in Peru. In the 1920s, pilots flying over the area noticed unusual shapes below. Straight lines, sharp angles, and gigantic figures did not look like things that could have been created by nature alone. These observations were the first moments when the Nazca Lines were noticed in the modern sense. However, being noticed did not mean being understood. Why were the Nazca Lines taken seriously so late? Initially, these lines were interpreted as natural erosion or simple paths. The archaeological world struggled to accept that such traces could be the result of conscious design, until systematic measurements were made. At this point, Maria Reiche's work became decisive. From the 1940s on, Reiche began working in the Nazca Desert and examined the lines one by one. Her measurements revealed that the lines were not random, but made according to certain proportions and directions. These findings confirmed that the Nazca Lines were the result of conscious planning. How were the Nazca Lines made? This was one of the most technically intriguing questions. The perfection of the lines gave the impression that advanced tools were used, but the truth was much simpler. The surface of the Nazca Desert was covered with dark-colored stones. When these stones were removed, the lighter-colored soil underneath was revealed. The Nazca people used this contrast to create the lines. Stakes and ropes were used for straight lines, and the figures were enlarged and transferred to the ground from small-scale sketches. This method showed that the Nazca Society had mathematical thinking and organizational skills. It also revealed that the lines were not an individual feat, but a collective effort. Why haven't these lines eroded? The climate of the Nazca Desert played a decisive role in preserving the lines. There is almost no rainfall in the region. The wind is extremely weak. These environmental conditions allowed the lines to remain intact for thousands of years. This made the Nazca Lines almost like a natural archive. What was the purpose of the Nazca Lines? This question stood at the center of the whole narrative, and there was no single answer. One of the early theories suggested that the lines served as an astronomical calendar. Some lines were found to align with sunrise and sunset points. This implied that the lines might have been used to mark the seasons, which would be vital information for an agricultural society. But over time, it was realized that this theory did not explain all the lines. Hundreds of lines and figures could not all be related to celestial events. Were the Nazca Lines created for ritual reasons? This pointed to the second major theory. For Nazca society, water was at the center of life. Some lines appeared connected to underground water channels and sources. This suggested that the lines could be related to rain-making and fertility rituals. Large flat areas might have been used for ceremonial processions. People could have walked on these lines praying to the gods. In this context, the Nazca Lines were interpreted not as something to look at, but as sacred spaces to be lived in. What did the animal figures represent? The animal figures among the Nazca Lines carried symbolic meanings. The spider was associated with rain and moisture. Bird figures may have symbolized the connection to the sky and divine powers. The monkey could have represented cycles and continuity. The whale symbolized water, life, and distant powers. These figures reflected the symbolic relationship that the Nazca society had with nature. Why were the lines so large? This was the most mysterious aspect of the Nazca Lines. Why were these forms, meaningless from the ground, kilometers long? Some researchers thought this size was a message to the gods. It was presumed that divine beings in the sky could see these shapes from above. In this way, the Nazca Lines acted as a communication between humans and gods. Another view was that the size represented social power. The lines symbolized the collective effort and unity of the Nazca society. Why did alien theories emerge? In the mid-20th century, the fact that the lines could only be seen from the air gave rise to speculative theories. However, these claims were not supported by scientific evidence. Archaeological findings clearly showed that the lines were entirely man-made. What is the current state of the Nazca Lines? The Nazca Lines are on the UNESCO World Heritage List, but the impact of the modern world now threatens this heritage. Tourism, vehicle crossings, and human activity put the fragile lines at risk. Thus, conservation efforts are crucial. Has the mystery of the Nazca Lines been solved? No. Although many questions have been answered, it cannot be said that the lines had a single and definitive purpose. Most likely, the Nazca Lines served more than one function. Astronomy, ritual, belief, and social structure all came together in these lines. The Nazca Lines are an embodiment of humanity's need for the unknown and its quest for meaning, etched onto the earth. They exist not so much to give answers as to provoke questions. The fact that the Nazca Lines cannot be explained by a single answer reveals their essential nature. Because these lines did not emerge for a single purpose, they arose from the overlapping of different needs, beliefs, and levels of knowledge. Nazca society did not only observe nature, but constantly interacted with it. Therefore, every major work created had both practical and symbolic meaning. The geography where the Nazca Lines are located was extremely challenging for agriculture. Rain was extremely rare, and farming greatly depended on underground water sources. The Nazca people built underground water channels called puquillos. These channels carried water to the surface. The alignment of some lines with these water systems was not seen as a coincidence. It reinforced the idea that the lines could indicate the location of water or be used in water-related rituals. This raises the following question. Why would a society associate such a vital resource as water with symbols drawn on the ground? The answer lies in the Nazca belief system. For them, water was not just a physical need, but a divine blessing. Therefore, all knowledge related to water was placed within a sacred framework. The lines could be the earthly manifestation of this sacredness. Traces found indicating that people walked on the Nazca Lines further strengthened the ritual theory. On the surface of some lines, signs of intensive human movement were identified. This suggested that the lines were not merely symbols to be watched from afar, but were actively used. People might have walked, stopped, changed direction, and held rituals at certain points along these lines. This brings up the question of why the lines are so straight and long. Long lines made ideal routes for ceremonial walks. Straightness strengthened a sense of direction and preserved ritual order, while geometric shapes could highlight the sanctity of specific areas. In other words, the lines may have functioned as a system that organized both movement and space. The relationship between the Nazca Lines and astronomy has not been completely ruled out, but it was gradually understood that this relationship was limited. Some lines did indeed match the sun's positions at certain times. This showed that the Nazca people carefully observed the sky. However, the idea that all the lines constituted an astronomical calendar was not fully supported by the evidence. This leads to another question. Did the Nazca Lines represent the sky, or did they organize life on Earth? Most likely, they did both. For the Nazca people, the sky and Earth were not separate concepts. The sun's movement, timing of rainfall, and farming cycles were parts of a single system. The lines may have embodied this holistic perspective. The animal figures of the Nazca Lines were also important elements of this holistic thought. These figures were not chosen randomly. The same animal symbols are also found on Nazca ceramics and textiles. This shows a strong connection between the lines and other cultural elements. Animals represented different powers of nature and were seen as a way to communicate with those forces. For example, the spider figure in Nazca culture was associated with fertility and rain. In a desert region, the presence of a spider might have been perceived as a sign of moisture. Bird figures symbolized connection to the sky. Birds might have been seen as the closest creatures to the gods. The monkey figure was linked to cyclicality and continuity. Marine animals like the whale represented distant but vital water sources. The size of these symbols emphasized their significance. A small figure could represent individual meaning, while a figure stretching for kilometers represented communal belief. This shows that the Nazca Lines were created not by individual but collective consciousness. The duration of the construction of the Nazca Lines is also a matter of curiosity. The lines were not all made in one period. At different times, different figures and lines were added. This suggests that the Nazca Lines were a living project. Each generation may have added its own beliefs and needs to this grand narrative. This explains why the lines are so diverse. Some lines are extremely simple, while some figures are quite complex. This diversity reflects the changing mindset of the Nazca society over time. Thus, the Nazca Lines tell a long story rather than a single message. The alien theories proposed in the 20th century were a modern interpretation of this story. The fact that the lines could only be seen from the air led to the emergence of such theories, but these claims lacked a scientific basis. The techniques used to make the Nazca Lines were entirely achievable by human hands. The construction process also fit the known cultural practices of the Nazca society. These theories were regarded less as scientific explanations and more as reflections of modern humanity's fascination with the unknown. The Nazca Lines are not mysterious because they are inherently puzzling, but because they have not been examined carefully enough. Today, the Nazca Lines are studied in more detail thanks to modern technologies. Satellite images, drones, and geophysical methods have been used to detect newly discovered lines and figures. These discoveries show that the Nazca Lines are still an unfinished subject. Every new finding brings new questions. At this point, the most crucial question is, are the Nazca Lines truly a riddle to be solved, or is their purpose not to offer definitive answers but to provoke continuous thought? The Nazca Lines continue to exist as a tangible expression of humanity's relationship with nature, time, and the unknown. Rather than exhibiting a civilization's power, they reflect its worldview. This view aims not to clash with nature, but to live in harmony with it. Therefore, the Nazca Lines are not only a heritage from the past, but also a reminder for today. No matter how far humans take their search for meaning, some questions cannot be reduced to a single sentence. The Nazca Lines are the earthly reflection of those questions. They were made not to be seen, but to be thought about. And perhaps for this reason, even thousands of years later, they are still being talked about. If you want to see more mysterious and fascinating historical content like this, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. What are your ideas and theories about the Nazca Lines? Let's meet in the comments.